Welcome, everybody. Hello, coming at you live from New York. This is Spirit Matters, your regular spiritual check-in with me, Dog Runga, in the Bhakti Center. I'm here with a live Zoom studio audience and you, wherever you're at. I'm really glad you're here. Quick question. This is your public service announcement. Make sure you're hydrating. I got myself a little glass of water before I started, and I think number one cause of a lot of our problems, we're not hydrating. So if you haven't yet, or if you're not, make sure you get a drink of water and do it soon. Simple things, simple things. We're reading through the Bhagavad Gita. Today's Friday. I'm going to India today, everybody. I'm going to India. And I'm going tonight, and it's a long journey. My flight's at 7 p.m. New York Eastern Time. I land in Delhi at 1 a.m. Sunday. and then I'm going to the MVT in Delhi to sleep for a few hours before making the 3-hour taxi ride to Vrindavan, where I will be there for a week for my friend Rukmini Podar's wedding. If you don't know Rukmini Podar, check her out on Instagram, Rockin' Ruxi. She is a great friend. We had her on a guest on the show a couple weeks ago. Maybe we'll have her again after her wedding extravaganza. But I'm going to India, and I'm looking forward to it, and I'm grateful that I'm going to get to be there. And I'll be staying in Vrindavan for 1 full week. And so I don't know what the podcast schedule is going to be next week, guys. I still don't. We're going to be playing it day by day. Okay. So you're just going to have to, if you're listening out there just in the listen world, you'll just have to tune in and see if we showed up. And if you're in the Zoom world, you just have to check the WhatsApp. I'll be updating you guys on that. But today's Friday, and we're here. We're right now. We're going to be here now. And we're reading the Bhagavad Gita. We've been reading the Bhagavad Gita, fourth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Jnana Yoga, Transcendental Knowledge. And I think we're in verse 16. Is that right, Kimberly? Great. Verse 16 is a real interesting one. Krishna speaking to Arjuna. We're just going to dive right into it today. Even the intelligent, meaning those with knowledge, who have awareness, are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction. This is always a section of the Gita that is a little bewildering, technical. Action and inaction. Now I shall explain to you what action is, knowing which you shall be liberated from all misfortune. So this idea of action and inaction, specifically the Sanskrit words used are karma and akarma. One of the things I love to do a lot in spiritual discussions is look at words and terms, because we throw words around a lot with varied understandings of what they mean. And in Sanskrit, it's really beautiful because words have very clear meanings, but they also have very deep and expansive meanings. And so the word karma literally means action. But it's also interesting when you look at the word in relation to what is acting. And so we've been talking a lot. The Gita explains a lot about the nature of identity. The Gita explains a lot about the nature of identity. And a big part of the Gita is realizing what's interacting with what. I've been referencing, I don't know if I've been referencing here or not, or in other classes that I'm giving, but I've been reading this book called Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul by this really amazing author. His name is Simon Haas. And it's about Arjuna's journey in the Bhagavad Gita. And the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is Arjuna Vishada Yoga, the yoga of Arjuna's despair. And so he makes this explanation of what is coined by others as the dark night of the soul, which we can refer to as a rock bottom, we can refer to as a low point in our life, or when there's a major crisis. And he defines what that is and how we can use those opportunities. Those are transition points towards growth. Those are the word yoga literally means to connect. And so yoga and the dark night of the soul means is what false conception about myself and life around me is really, to put it another way, how is the story about myself and the world need to expand? There's a story about myself, about others, about life that is too small to hold the experiences that I'm going through right now. And therefore we have this feeling of anxiety or the feeling of depression or feeling of whatever it might be, anything in between. But the reality is that the old story of who I am and the old story of the nature of reality and the nature of other people and the nature of life, it's too small to hold and process the experiences that I'm going through right now. And so I have an option to just ignore it and drown it and start up a new addiction, or get bitter or complain or blame other people, or just kind of like try to just sweep it under the rug, or have the opportunity to, like I said, get really, really bitter and blame other people and try to change the circumstances of my life to fit into the story that I have about who I am and about what life is about. Or I have the opportunity to connect myself to a narrative bigger than what I'm used to operating out of. And that's yoga. Yoga is connecting myself to something bigger than myself. And there are different ways of going about that. And so when we look at, he talks about yoga and the dark night of the soul, very much about, he starts with talking about our stories, the stories that we tell about ourselves and about how we are the lead character in the story of our lives. And he's got this section, I'm looking for this section about how he talks about that very often we're not even interacting. Yeah, this is it right here. I found it. Reading from Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul. So much of our story is inherited and then enforced, coerced, and impressed upon us. Well, I'm going to backtrack even a whole paragraph. This might be where we go today, guys. Buckle up. We take our stories extremely seriously. Anybody take your story extremely seriously? I do. We're prepared to fight for them, even lose friends over them. We carry that story with us wherever we go. We can't escape it. Our story is the script from which our life unfolds. So life is happening to us, life is happening around us, and we're processing it through the story we've created about who we are and the way life's supposed to go. And when we hit that big bump, it's because we are now looking at it through the lens of things aren't supposed to be this way. So much of our story, he goes on, is inherited and then enforced, coerced, and impressed upon us by society. From a young age, we're told what to be like, how to behave, what to want and hope for, and what to fear. Sometimes, this is Dale talking, no longer reading. Sometimes we're told directly by parents, and I have a friend of mine who has a memory of his mother driving by, he grew up in India, and his mother driving by a particular school in India saying, that's where you're going to go to school. And he was like a young boy, and like pressure, it was like an elite school. And so sometimes we're directly told by authority figures in our life about what our values should be and how we should live, et cetera. And sometimes we're indirectly told by culture, by the movies we watch, by the music we listen to, by the podcasts we listen to, by the city that we just live in, the people around us, the church we go to. We're just constantly absorbing messages about what our values are, about what's important to us, and about who we are and what we should be. There's the whole thing, the Disney princess syndrome, about just the idea of like, there's all the uproar about the new live action Little Mermaid movie, and that there's a black actress playing Ariel, and then there's people that are up in roar like, Ariel's not a white mermaid, as if like, reminds me it reminds me when I think there was like a debate about Bert and Ernie on Sesame Street, about whether they're a gay couple, and the people from Sesame Street had to come out and clarify, they are puppets. They are neither straight or gay. They are make-believe fictional characters. It's just like, they're like, And then there's people who feel liberated by the fact that Ariel is being played by a Black actress, because there's people that look onto a screen that have never seen somebody that looks like them before. There's people who look at a screen and it's like they've never seen somebody that looks like them before, and they're like, wow, she looks like me. And we don't realize that when we're looking, when you look at, you know, I'm not here, I mean, in one sense I was like, I'm not here to bash on Disney, but at the same time there's a lot about Disney that you can bash on, but I'm not here to crush your dreams. Keep your kids away from this podcast, in terms of Disney. But you know, when you just look at a screen and you see women looking a certain way, when you see men behaving in a certain way, that's telling you something about who you're supposed to be. That's telling you something about what you're supposed to look like, what you're supposed to behave, what you're not supposed to look like, what you're not supposed to behave like, you know? And so there's an account I love to follow on Instagram that talks about yoga, like yoga is an asana practice. And they have like all of these, like, you know, we talk about yoga being accessible, but then we have like all of these like pictures of people in poses doing things of like, that's what yoga is, you know? And so we see something and it creates a story. And then we internalize that, you know what? I'm not enough. I'm less than. I'm not worthy unless I become, right? And we start to pile on all of these conceptions onto our story. So back to Simon Hawes, Yoga and the Dark Night of the Soul. He reads, so much of our story is inherited and then enforced, coerced, and impressed upon us by society. From a young age, we're told what to be like, how to behave, what to want and hope for, and what to fear. We internalize these ideas, often unthinkingly. We come to believe we are what we wear, what we drive, what we watch, and what we watch it on. We work very hard to keep up appearances. We try to live up to so many expectations and pressures. Slowly, imperceptibly, we build the walls of our own confinement. And this, Dal speaking now, commentary, switching in and out of reading commentary mode. Fact, maybe I should have a different voice, like, should have like my James Earl Jones voice of like, we come to believe we are what we wear, what we drive, what we watch, what we watch it on. Maybe that's not James Earl Jones, but whatever the voice may be. And then I can go back to my regular voice. And so my commentary on this is that really what's going on is that we've got these stories about who we're supposed to be. And it's just like, it just messes with the mind and the ego. And it's just like, I don't even know who I am anymore. Like, my kids are never watching Disney. But back to my commentary about the four agreements, you know, or just the idea of agreements. What is it? Miguel Cervantes. Great book. Great book. I never read the fifth agreement. Part of me just like looked at the table of context and was like, oh, that's the fifth agreement. Don't need to read the book, but I probably should. There's probably a lot of great wisdom in there. But the idea of agreements that we make, and I think what we're being invited into is that we ourselves have agreed to these stories. You've agreed to it. You may not have even done it consciously, but you've agreed to certain stories. And part of growth, part of being an adult, part of maturing, part of coming into spiritual life is taking an assessment of the stories that I've agreed to and choosing differently. Being willing to choose. The Bhagavad Gita is literally simply just an alternate story for you to explore and be open to. There's another story of you. There's a different story of who you are, and what your purpose is, and where you're going to find meaning, and what you need and don't need in order to be, quote unquote, worthy of love and belonging and acceptance and connection and relationship to God and higher power and source and meaning. So he goes on, back to Simon Hawes. With everyone living out their personal story, we are in the end simply interacting with each other's projections. That's the line I wanted to get to. With everyone living out their personal story, we are in the end simply interacting with each other's projections. We view everyone else through the lens of our own story, and our stories can conflict and collide. We find our friends in those who support our personal narrative and enemies in those who challenge or undermine it. I remember the first job I ever had, pretty much the only job I kind of had. Other than that job, I was working for my friend's business for a short while, but pretty much the only like professional job I was working at a restaurant in California. And I was a teenager. I was underage. I was under 18, which you're allowed to do. I was, I don't know, 16 or whatever. But because I was not an adult, legal adult, I wasn't allowed to serve in the bar. You know, there's a restaurant and it had a separate bar in the restaurant, but it was like a family restaurant. And it was a burger restaurant. This is my pre-yoga days. Hare Krishna. And so anyways. Oh, Krishna. And so anyways, there was a guy who worked up in the bar. I remember, I think his name was Scott. Scott, if you're out there, I'm praying for you, buddy. Anyway, so he was like, you ever have this, anybody ever in this experience where you feel like you're an eternal coming of age, where like, even though like I'm now 38, I do have the perception that everyone is still older than wiser than me. Like I meet people who are like 23 and I'm just like, you're like an older person, you know, like you still feel like you're a kid. I still feel like that all, like I still, like you ask that question, like, where are the adults? And you realize, oh my God, I'm the adult. When did that happen? Who allowed that to happen? Anyways, so I mean, I looked at him as an adult, but he was probably 22, you know. So anyways, this guy Scott, and he worked in the bar, and he was a little bit of a rough around the edges, and people thought he was mean and unpleasant, and most people didn't like him and thought he was a jerk. And I remember when they were just showing me up the bar area, because sometimes I would have to deliver food up there because I worked in the kitchen and would bring food to the tables. And he was nice to me. And I thought, this guy Scott's a nice guy. Don't know what everyone's talking about. And realizing that my complete perception of this man was simply based upon how he treated me. And everyone's perception of this man was based upon how he treated them. And we make a judgment. He's a nice guy. He's a jerk. Why? Well, because that's how he treats me. And then he treats somebody else differently. And then you think someone's a really nice guy, and then they turn on you. And all of a sudden, the switch flips, and you know what? They've become a jerk. But really, it's just our story interacting with their story. We find our friends in those who support our personal narrative and enemies in those who challenge or undermine it. We put judgments on people that have nothing to do with who they really are. It simply has to do with the extent to which they support my personal narrative about myself or the degree to which they challenge it. Last word I'll read from Simon Haas before going back to the Gita, because I promise this is inspired by that short verse we read in the Gita. Lost in our story, we experience a continuous compulsion to define who we are to ourselves and others. Through Facebook and social media, we now have the technology to refine and polish our image of ourselves. We forget that the lead character in our story is birthed by the mind. The ancient texts of India refer to this fictitious self as Hamkar, which in Sanskrit means literally eye-making. Mostly, we live from this illusory, constructed self. We, the storyteller, remained undiscovered. So, when we talk about in the Gita, this idea of karma, which is action, a lot of the discussion of karma in the Gita is who's doing the action? What's interacting with what? And what we realize, somebody was asking me the other day, like, what is self-realization? I was like, thanks for giving me the easy questions. But he said, what is self-realization? And I think the self-realization is just the realization that I am different than all the crap that's interacting in front of me. I'm not my body, I'm not my mind, I'm something divine. And so the idea when Krishna talks about karma and akarma, it's going to get a little technical over the next few days, even though, as I just said, I don't exactly know when the next podcast is going to be. But the idea of karma and adkarma, and this is something that Arjuna got so confused about. It's something that Arjuna got so confused about, is that akarma, which is being translated here into English as inaction, is not actually not doing anything. Because what we realized earlier on in the previous chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, it's not possible to ever be not doing anything. The soul is by nature active, and the material energy is constantly interacting with itself. But the idea of akarma, removing myself from the implications of bondage and entanglement, is when I'm able to separate myself from it and realize, like, I'm really just watching a movie. And why am I attaching myself so deeply? This is something I think maybe I talked about this yesterday. We're talking about, what did we talk about yesterday? I think it was the idea I was talking about, like, why do I let things bother me so much? Was I talking about that yesterday, Kimberly? She's like, I don't know. I have no idea.
We talked about Krishna on the porch yesterday, calling
Krishna on the porch. She's like, I remember Krishna on the porch sipping some lemonade, calling us back home. That's what I remember. Someone in the chat is saying, Jenna Vutsal, I'm not my mind, I'm not my body, I'm something divine. It's actually, I'm not my body, I'm not my mind, I'm something divine. That is credited to the one and only Raghunath Prabhu. So I'm borrowing that one from him. And so Raghunath coined that one. It's one that he uses often, but it's a great one. I'm not my body, I'm not my mind, I'm something divine. I have a t-shirt that says that, Super Soul Farm. And so it's a great one. Feel free to use it, share it, tag Raghunath. But I think I was saying, maybe I've been going through something recently personally. And I think that I was talking about the ideas of, like, the gift of power and the gift of, like, how when something really challenges comes up, that we have the opportunity. I think it was here. Sometimes I'm speaking and I don't know if it was here on the podcast or somewhere else. But the idea of that, something can really be bothering me. Like, there can be a real, like, challenge, like an interpersonal challenge, or whether it's a conflict at work or whatever. And I'm going through something where there's a challenge in front of me in life, and I'm so affixed on it. And I'm finding myself in moments of just, like, the nature of what's going on and the nature of the degree to which I am just so overly affixed on this, and, like, disturbing my consciousness on the regular, and, like, conversations in my head, and stressed out or worried or self-conceptions, is disproportionate. Like, it's quite disproportionate, which tells me that there's something more going on in me that I need to look at, which is the question, like, why do I get so attached to this movie of my life that I'm not really even a permanent character in? And so when he's talking about the idea of akarma, he's talking about the idea of just become a little bit more detached from your story, because it's not even really your story. It's just some material energy interacting with itself, and the real you is so much bigger. Richard Rohr, one of my favorite authors, I quote him a lot. He said that it's impossible to offend the true self. When I'm feeling offended, I know it's coming from a place of the ego, because the real self is just too big. It's just way too deep in itself. It's way too expansive to get too caught up in worrying about all these minutiae. It doesn't mean that nothing affects me. I just become stoic. It means more, like Krishna says in the Gita in this chapter 2, verse 70, that, like, the way that rivers flow into the ocean maintains its own level. And so, yes, things can flow into me and disturbances will come. And it's interesting also in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, verse 14, he mentions the idea of that happiness and distress are like the winter and summer seasons. They come and they go. One must learn to tolerate. Tom's tikshasva bharata. He says to tikshasva, being tolerant. Interestingly, he says, he doesn't say one should not notice them. He doesn't say that one shouldn't experience them. He says one should learn to tolerate them in a way that they don't get thrown off course. And later in that chapter, he gives the analogy of the ocean, like rivers. And so, yes, things will bother me. Yes, people will annoy me. Yes, I will annoy myself. But if I'm finding myself just getting so absorbed and caught up in some material drama, I am lost in the world of karma. And Krishna is inviting us into the world of, and that's why he says here in this verse, even the intelligent are bewildered in determining what is action and what is inaction, what is karma and what is akarma. Now I shall explain to you what action is, knowing which you shall be liberated from all misfortune. So what Krishna is saying is, I want to give you a gift, how to move in this world, how to act in this world, but not get caught up and lost in it. How to swim but not drown. And the example given is like a lotus leaf, untouched by water. Lotus leaves are like, have this kind of like waxy texture or a surface that if you drop water, it literally just beads up and rolls off. So I think that's where I'm going to stop today. Kimberly, what kind of takeaways you got for us? Turning it over to you. And if anyone in the chat's got takeaways, we can read them also. Martha so beautifully said, step away from it and observe the movie you're in, and you will discover so much. Sydney, so important to be understanding and encouraging and loving towards others. Everyone is suffering in Kali Yuga. Ain't that the truth? Martha, loving this. Amazing discussion today, Dale. Thanks. Prayer emoji. Love you, Martha.
Takeaways.
All right, now I'm turning it into you, Kimberly.
Expand your story to hold the full experience. Bumps happen when we think things are not supposed to be this way. Get better, not bitter. We are living with each other's projections. Separate yourself from the movie because there's another story to who we are.
There's totally another story. There's totally another story. Thank you. For those who happen to be here in the live Zoom room, we've got a merch link dropped by Dana Kay for t-shirts with I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm something divine. Great takeaways, Kimberly. Thank you. And I'll just say I'm going through it right now. I am experiencing that growth edge of the story that I have about myself and the world around me is way too small to process the experiences that life is bringing me. And I'm going to India today. I'm going to pray about it. I'm going to pray for all you guys. Not that you need to be in India to pray. I mean, I pray for you all the time, and I hope you pray for me too. But I will be thinking of all you guys. I love you. Thanks, Pasha. Appreciate that. I'm reading all the chats here. And so, but yeah, it's just like, whoa, like I'm going to try not to start another podcast episode right now, but I just remember like one of the biggest lessons for me in marriage, and this is going to sound silly, but it's embarrassing and it's silly, but it's really true. Is just realizing that like, wow, like I'm not God's gift to the world. You know, you realize like you're in a relationship and oh my God, I'm part of the problem, you know? And you realize like if there's an argument going on, yeah, maybe it's like 10% me, 90% them, you know? I'm sorry for a little bit, but like if you understood everything where I'm coming from, clearly I haven't done anything wrong. And then you just realize like, wow, like there's so much more of the ego that's running the show that I'm ready to just break out of. I want to be. Anyways, love you guys tons. And I'm going to be praying for growth, going to be praying for Dana wrote, but how are we not the mind if the mind travels with the next life? Confused. Good question. The mind, we have a physical body and a subtle body. The mind, the body, real quick. The body is like the hardware. The mind is like the software. We are the soul. So let's just, you got a new computer. I just got a new computer recently. And you get your, what is it? Time capsule. What is the thing that Apple, time machine? You load everything up onto a hard drive. And Kimberly's laughing at me. Kimberly's like my little Gen Z guru. Is what keeps me up to date with what the kids are doing these days. We're using the time machine and transferring. I'm like the guy from Zoolander. It's like the information is in the computer. It's in the computer. And I break open the computer to try to find it. But anyways, just like you have your hardware, and then what do you do if your computer breaks and you need a computer? You transfer all your data and you transfer it over to the new computer. You are not the data in that computer. You're the user. But the subtle body, the software, the mind, the intelligence, and the ego carries all of that over into your new hardware. But you're neither. You're none of that. You're the user. And eventually you realize that you don't need a material mind or a material body. You uncover it. Self-realization. Hare Krishna. All right, guys, I'm going to cut it here before Kimberly, what are the takeaways on what I just said? Cutting it here, guys. I love you lots. Please be well. Take care. And I hope to be with you again soon. Bye-bye.